The year was 2347, and humanity had spread across 12 star systems, but they remained a small and unimportant species in the grand politics of the galaxy. The Velkari Dominion was an ancient empire of giant insect-like beings who had ruled the Orion Arm for 60,000 years, and they had watched humanity grow with great interest. When the invitation came, it shocked every human leader from Earth to the farthest colony world, because no species had received such an honor in over 4 centuries. Captain Daniel Grant stood on the bridge of the diplomatic vessel Endurance and read the transmission for the 5th time. His hands were steady, but his heart was racing, because he understood what this meant. The Velkari High Matriarch herself had sent this message, and she was a being so old that she had watched 17 civilizations rise and fall. She wanted to host a formal dinner with human representatives, and the invitation was written in such beautiful language, seemed like poetry. Daniel turned to his communication officer and said they needed to send this to Earth Command immediately. The officer nodded, and within minutes the message was traveling across the void of space toward humanity's homeworld. Daniel walked to the observation window and stared out at the stars, and wondered what the Velkari truly wanted from his species. Ambassador Lisa Monroe received the news while she was negotiating a trade agreement on Mars Colony 7. She was a woman of 53 years, with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many lies from too many alien species. When she read the invitation, she felt a cold sensation in her stomach that she could not explain. Her assistant asked her what was wrong, and Lisa simply said that something about this felt too good to be true. The United Colonies government selected Lisa to lead the delegation because she was the best diplomat humanity had ever produced. She had prevented 3 wars and negotiated peace between species that had been killing each other for centuries. If anyone could handle the Velkari, it was her, and everyone knew it. Lisa assembled her team carefully over the next 2 weeks. Commander Nathan Cole would be her head of security, and he was a man who had fought in the border wars and survived things that would break most soldiers. He was quiet and watchful, and he never smiled, but Lisa trusted him with her life. Dr. Patricia Webb was the team's xenobiologist, and she had studied alien species for 30 years. She knew more about non-human biology than anyone else in the colonies. Finally, there was Samuel Price, the cultural attaché, and many people thought he was just a decoration on the team, but Lisa knew better. Samuel had a gift for understanding how alien societies worked, and he had saved more missions with his knowledge than any weapon ever could. The Endurance departed from Earth orbit on a cold Tuesday morning and began its long journey through Velkari. Space. The ship was beautiful and sleek, and it carried the hopes of all humanity within its metal walls. Daniel Grant remained as captain, and he pushed the engines as hard as he dared, because the Velkari had given them a specific date for the dinner, and being late would be a terrible insult. 3 days into their journey, something strange began to happen. Other alien vessels started to change course when they detected the Endurance approaching. Lisa watched from the bridge as a Kythrani trading ship fled at maximum speed, even though the Kythrani were supposed to be friendly with humans. Warning beacons began appearing on their sensors, and they were broadcasting in a dozen different languages. Nathan ran the translations, and his face grew darker with each one. The messages all said the same thing in different words. Turn back. Do not go to Velkari space. You are walking into death. Lisa ordered Nathan to record everything, but she did not change course. Mission and humanity needed to know what the Velkari wanted. On the 5th day, a Kythrani merchant broke all communication protocols and sent a direct message to the Endurance. The alien appeared on their screen, and it was shaking with what could only be fear. Its translator produced words in a mechanical voice that said the last species the Velkari invited never left their homeworld. Then the transmission cut off, and the Kythrani ship jumped to hyperspace before anyone could respond. Patricia studied the biological data for the brief transmission and reported that the Kithrani had been experiencing extreme stress responses. Whatever it knew about the Valkyrie had terrified it beyond rational thought, and Kithrani were not a species that scared easily. Lisa called a meeting in the ship conference room and laid out everything they knew. The team sat around the table and looked at each other with serious expressions. Samuel said that he had been researching Valkyrie history, and there were gaps in the records that troubled him. 17 species had been invited to formal dinners over the past 10,000 years, and none of those species existed anymore. They had all gone extinct within a century of attending the Valkyrie feast. Nathan suggested they turn back and report this to Earth Command, but Lisa shook her head. She said that if they ran now, humanity would look weak, and the Valkyrie might see that as an invitation to simply take what they wanted. Sometimes the only way forward was through, and they needed to learn the truth about what happened to those other species. Daniel agreed with Lisa, and said his crew would follow them into whatever awaited. The Endurance was more than just a diplomatic ship, and it carried secrets that even Lisa did not know about yet. Daniel had his orders from people high above the normal chain of command, and those orders told him to be ready for anything. The Valkyrie escort ships arrived on the 7th day, were massive vessels that dwarfed the Endurance like whales swimming beside a minnow. The lead ship sent a formal greeting and welcomed the human delegation to Valkyrie space. Lisa responded with equal formality and thanked them for the honor of the invitation. She requested clarification about the warnings they had received from other species, and asked if there was anything humanity should know before arriving at the homeworld. The Valkyrie response came after a long pause, and the words sent a chill down her spine. The alien voice said simply that humans honor us with your trust. Lisa ended the communication and sat in silence for a long moment. Patricia asked her what she was thinking, and Lisa said she was thinking that trust was a funny word to use. It implied that there was something to be afraid of, and the Valkyrie had just admitted that without saying it directly. The Endurance continued its journey, surrounded by the massive escort ships, and every human on board knew that they were flying into danger. But they were human, and humans did not run from the unknown. They faced it, and they survived it, and they came out stronger on the other side. That was what made them different from all the other species in the galaxy. Samuel spent the remaining days studying everything he could find about Valkyrie culture and traditions. He was looking for something that he could not name yet, but he knew it was there. Hidden in the ancient records was a secret, and if he could find it, then maybe, just maybe, humanity would not become the 18th species to vanish after attending a Valkyrie dinner. The homeworld of Sethax Prime appeared on their sensors, and it was beautiful and terrible at the same time. They had arrived, and there was no turning back now. Sethax Prime filled the view screen, and every human on the Endurance stared at it in silence. The planet was covered with cities that stretched across entire continents like geometric patterns carved into the surface by giants. Massive towers reached up into the clouds, and transportation networks connected everything in perfect straight lines. This was a world that had been shaped by intelligence for thousands of centuries, and it showed the power of the Valkyrie in every single detail. Lisa stood beside Daniel on the bridge and watched as their shuttle prepared for descent. She had chosen to take only her core team down to the surface, while the Endurance remained in orbit. Daniel wished her luck, and there was something in his eyes that told her he knew more than he was saying. She trusted him to do whatever needed to be done if things went wrong. The shuttle broke through the upper atmosphere, and immediately Lisa noticed the smell. Even with the air filters running, she could detect something strange coming through. Patricia checked her instruments and reported that the atmosphere contained trace elements of copper and organic decay. The smell was death, and it permeated everything on this world. Nathan sat rigid in his seat, with his hand resting near his sidearm. He was watching everything and trusting nothing. Samuel had his tablet out and was recording every detail of their descent, because cultural information could be found in the smallest things. The way buildings were arranged, and the colors used in their design, and the patterns of movement below, all told stories about who the Valkyrie really were. The shuttle landed on a platform made of black stone that gleamed like polished glass. A delegation of Valkyrie waited for them, and at the front stood Sub-Matriarch Vexus. She was 12 feet tall, with a body covered in dark chitinous plates, and mandibles that could cut through steel. Her eyes were compound structures that reflected the humans, like broken mirrors, and when she spoke, her voice was perfectly modulated English without any accent at all. "Welcome, honored guests, to Sethax Prime," she said the words with practiced elegance. "You grace us with your presence at the final feast." Lisa caught the phrase and stored it away for later analysis. Final feast was an interesting choice of words, and she doubted it was accidental. She stepped forward and introduced herself and her team with all the proper diplomatic formalities. Vexus responded in kind and gestured for them to follow her into the main complex. Nathan fell into step beside Lisa and whispered that something was wrong with the guards. Lisa glanced at the ceremonial soldiers lining their path and understood immediately what he meant. They were not watching the humans with the bored attention of soldiers doing routine duty. They were watching with focus and hunger, like predators studying prey. Their mandibles clicked in subtle patterns, and their bodies shifted with barely contained anticipation. Patricia activated her biological scanner and pretended to be studying the architecture while she gathered data. The readings confirmed what Nathan had sensed. The Valkyrie around them were producing elevated pheromone signatures that her database identified as consistent with predatory excitement. These aliens were not just welcoming guests. They were anticipating something else entirely. The humans were escorted to their quarters in a tower that overlooked the central city. The rooms were lavish beyond anything Lisa had ever seen. Artwork from 100 conquered worlds decorated the walls, and technology that humans could not even understand sat on display like trophies. Everything was designed to impress and intimidate, and it was working. Samuel wandered through the chambers with his tablet recording everything. He stopped near a decorative panel on the far wall and noticed something odd about the spacing. Slightly different from the others around it, and there were marks on the floor suggesting it had been moved recently. He glanced around to make sure no Valkyrie were watching, and then he carefully pulled the panel aside. Behind it was bare metal wall, and the surface was covered with scratch marks. Thousands of them, layered over each other in desperate patterns. Someone or something had been trapped in this room and had tried to claw their way out. Samuel felt his stomach turn as he examined the marks more closely. Near the bottom, hidden in a corner, was a single word carved into the metal with what must have been tremendous effort. He took a picture and showed it to Patricia, who studied the symbols with growing unease. The language was not in any of their standard databases, but she had seen similar structures before in extinct species records. She told the others she needed time to work on a translation, and she spent the entire night running the symbols through every linguistic program she had access to. By morning, Patricia had her answer, and she gathered the team in the bathroom with the water running to mask their conversation from any listening devices. The word was from the Helix species. She explained that the Helix had been a peaceful civilization of artists and philosophers who had gone extinct 300 years ago. The official records said they had died from a plague, but Patricia had never believed that story. The word carved into the wall was simple. It was prey. Lisa absorbed this information without visible reaction, but inside her mind was racing. Everything made sense now. The warnings from other species, the extinction of 17 civilizations, the phrase "final feast." The Valkyrie did not invite other species to dinner as honored guests. They invited them as the main course. Nathan wanted to fight their way back to the shuttle immediately, but Lisa stopped him. She said that running would not solve anything, because the Valkyrie would simply hunt them down and then attack human space with full force. They needed more information, and they needed a plan. Most importantly, they needed to understand exactly what they were dealing with before they could respond. Samuel said he had been studying Valkyrie social structures, and there was something strange about their government. The High Matriarch held absolute power, but that power was based on ancient traditions and rituals that even she could not ignore. Somewhere in those traditions might be a weakness they could exploit. Lisa nodded and told her team to continue gathering information while acting like everything was normal. They would attend the pre-dinner reception that evening, and they would watch and learn. The Valkyrie thought they were dealing with ignorant prey, but they were wrong. Humans had not survived 3 extinction-level events and 2 world wars by being weak. They had survived by being smart and adaptable, vicious than anything that tried to kill them. The Valkyrie had made a terrible mistake inviting humanity to their table. They just did not know it yet. The team prepared for the reception with careful attention to detail. Nathan hid weapons in places the Valkyrie would never think to look, and Patricia prepared biological compounds that could affect alien nervous systems. Samuel memorized everything he had learned about Valkyrie customs, and Lisa practiced her diplomatic smile until it was perfect. When Sub-Matriarch Vexus came to escort them to the reception hall, Lisa greeted her with warmth and grace. Vexus seemed pleased by the human cooperation and made comments about how previous guests had been much more nervous at this stage. Lisa asked what had happened to those previous guests, and Vexus simply said they had been consumed by the experience. The double meaning was not lost on any of the humans, but they kept their expressions neutral and followed their host into the heart of Valkyrie power. The reception hall was filled with hundreds of the alien nobility, and every single one of them turned to watch the humans enter. Lisa felt like a lamb walking into a den of wolves. But lambs did not carry concealed weapons, and lambs did not have warships hidden in orbit. These wolves had no idea what they had invited into their home. The reception hall was the largest enclosed space Lisa had ever seen, and it stretched for what seemed like miles in every direction. Columns of black stone rose to support a ceiling painted with scenes of Valkyrie conquest and triumph. Thousands of the alien nobility moved through the space in elaborate patterns that seemed random, but were actually carefully choreographed social rituals. Servants carried trays of food and drink, and Lisa noticed that many of the dishes contained items she could not identify. She also noticed that many of those items had once been alive, in ways that made her stomach turn. Sub-Matriarch Vexus guided the humans through the crowd, and introduced them to various important figures. Each Valkyrie greeted them with the same predatory interest, and the same subtle clicking of mandibles. Patricia whispered to Lisa that the pheromone levels in the room were off the charts, and every single alien was in a state of heightened anticipation. Nathan kept his hand near his hidden weapon, and his eyes moving constantly. He counted exits and guard positions, and potential cover points. His military mind was already planning escape routes, even though he knew escape might be impossible. Samuel walked beside him, recording everything with tiny camera hidden in his formal collar pin. Lisa decided it was time to stop playing games. She had learned enough to confirm her suspicions, and now she needed to know exactly what the Valkyrie planned. She stopped in the center of the reception hall and raised her voice loud enough to carry across the enormous space. She called out to Sub-Matriarch Vexus and demanded to know the truth about this invitation. The entire hall fell silent, and every Valkyrie turned to stare at the tiny human who dared to speak with such authority. Vexus approached with something that might have been surprise in her alien features. Lisa continued speaking and said she knew about the Helix and the other 16 species who had been invited to formal dinners. She knew about the scratches on the walls and the word carved into the metal. She knew what the phrase "final feast" really meant. Vexus was silent for a long moment, and then she made a sound that the translator identified as laughter. The other Velkhari joined in, and the hall filled with the clicking and chittering of alien amusement. Vexus said that humans were more perceptive than expected, and that made this so much more enjoyable. She made no attempt to deny anything. The dinner invitation was indeed a hunt, and it was a tradition older than human civilization itself. Young species were invited and tested, and consumed both literally and figuratively. Their worlds were absorbed into the Dominion, and their people became sustenance for Velkhari growth. This was how the Empire had maintained its power for 60,000 years, and it was the natural order of the galaxy. "You are prey," Vexus said with terrible calm. "That achieves star travel, eventually meets us, and they all end the same way. You should feel honored because most species we simply tank without ceremony. But you showed promise, and we wish to see if you were worthy of a proper hunt." Lisa looked around the hall at the hundreds of Velkhari who surrounded them. Every one of them was larger and stronger than any human, and they were all armed with natural weapons that could tear through flesh like paper. Communication with the Endurance had been blocked since they landed, and the dinner would begin in 6 hours. Every alien in this chamber knew exactly what would be served as the main course. Nathan reached for his weapon, but Lisa stopped him with a raised hand. She kept her eyes locked on Vexus, and her voice steady as stone. "We accept your invitation," she said calmly. The Velkhari seemed surprised by this response. Previous prey species had always begged, or threatened, or tried to run at this point, but this human simply accepted her fate. Vexus asked if Lisa understood what she was agreeing to. Lisa smiled, and it was not the diplomatic smile she had practiced. This was something older and darker, and it made Vexus take an involuntary step backward. "But you should know something about humanity," Lisa said. "We have a tradition too. When someone invites us to dinner, we always bring a gift." Vexus tilted her massive head and asked what gift humans could possibly offer to the Velkhari Dominion. Lisa did not answer directly. Instead, she asked Vexus how much the Velkhari knew about human history. Vexus said they had studied humanity extensively and found them to be a violent and unstable species that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times. "Exactly," Lisa replied. "We are violent, we are unstable, and we have been fighting each other for our entire existence. That means we have had a lot of practice." She explained that humanity had survived 2 world wars where tens of millions died. They had survived a nuclear exchange that killed billions more. They had survived asteroid impacts and plagues and ice ages and every other disaster that the universe had thrown at them. Each time they came back stronger and meaner and better at killing things that tried to kill them first. Patricia stepped forward and added that humanity was also very good at biological warfare. She held up a small vial that she had hidden in her formal attire and explained that it contained a compound specifically designed to target Velkhari nervous systems. If released, it would cause massive disruption to their pheromone communication and leave them unable to coordinate. Nathan showed his weapon, which had been disguised as a ceremonial decoration. It was a compressed plasma pistol, capable of burning through Velkhari armor plating. He had 3 more hidden in various places, and his team outside had even heavier equipment. Samuel spoke up and said he had been studying Velkhari law. Tradition. He had discovered something very interesting about how the High Matriarch maintained her power. There was an ancient rite that governed succession, and it could be invoked under very specific circumstances. The Velkhari began to murmur among themselves, and Lisa could see uncertainty replacing their earlier confidence. These humans were not reacting like prey. They were reacting like predators who had walked into a trap on purpose. Vexus demanded to know what the humans wanted. Lisa said they wanted to meet the High Matriarch and discuss new terms for the relationship between their species. If the Velkhari refused, then humanity would demonstrate why they had survived everything the universe had thrown at them. The reception hall was silent as Vexus considered her options. She had expected this evening to be entertaining, but not like this. Finally, she said the High Matriarch would speak with the humans before the dinner began. Looked forward to the conversation. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, with her team following behind her. Every Valkyrie in the hall watched them go, and for the first time in 60,000 years, the predators were not sure who was hunting whom. Nathan waited until they were back in their quarters before he let out a breath he had been holding. He asked Lisa if she had a plan, or if she had been bluffing. Lisa admitted that it was a bit of both, but the important thing was that they had bought themselves time. Patricia said her compound was real and would work as described, but it was only a temporary measure. Nathan's weapons were effective, but they could not fight their way through an entire planet. They needed something bigger. Samuel said he had found what they needed. The right he had mentioned was real, and it was called the Challenge of Succession. It had not been invoked in 4,000 years, but it was still technically valid under Valkyrie law. Species survived a formal hunt. They could claim the right to challenge for a position within the Dominion hierarchy. Lisa asked what that meant in practical terms. Samuel said it meant they needed to not only survive the dinner, but turn the tables so completely that the Valkyrie would have no choice but to recognize humanity as equals. They needed to become the hunters. Lisa nodded and said she knew exactly how to do that. She touched her neural implant and sent a coded message to Captain Daniel Grant on the Endurance. The message was short and simple. It said to unwrap the gift. Captain Daniel Grant received the message on the bridge of the Endurance, and his face showed no emotion as he read the 3 words. He turned to his crew and told them it was time to show the Valkyrie what humanity had brought to dinner. The diplomatic vessel Endurance was not what it appeared to be. On the surface, it looked like a standard transport ship designed for carrying ambassadors and their staff. But beneath that exterior was something very different. The ship was a prototype warship carrying enough firepower to crack a continent. And it had been sent on this mission for exactly this reason. Earth Command had suspected the truth about the Valkyrie invitations for years. The disappearance of 17 species was too consistent to be coincidence. And human intelligence had gathered fragments of information from survivors of Valkyrie attacks. They knew the dinner was a trap, and they had prepared accordingly. Daniel ordered his crew to begin the transformation. Plates slid aside to reveal weapon arrays that had been hidden beneath decorative panels. The engines reconfigured to provide power to systems that officially did not exist. Within minutes, the Endurance had changed from a peaceful diplomat into a warship capable of engaging an entire fleet. The Valkyrie escort ships detected the change and immediately moved to intercept. They were massive vessels designed to intimidate, and they outnumbered the Endurance 10-1. Their commander sent a warning, demanding that the humans stand down and surrender. Daniel responded by firing the first salvo. The Endurance weapons were human designs, refined through centuries of warfare. They struck the Valkyrie orbital defense grid with precision that the aliens had never encountered. Station after station exploded in brilliant flashes of light, as human technology proved superior to Valkyrie assumptions. The escort ships tried to respond, but they were too slow and too confident in their own superiority. The second salvo targeted the communication arrays that connected Sethax Prime to the rest of the Dominion. Daniel knew they could not win a prolonged war against the entire Empire, but they did not need to. They only needed to win here and now and make a statement so loud that the Valkyrie would never forget it. On the surface, Lisa felt the ground shake as the first explosions lit up the night sky. She gathered her team and told them it was time to move. They had a dinner to attend, and they were going to be the guests of honor in a very different way than the Valkyrie had planned. The Great Hall of Sethax Prime had hosted the consumption of 17 sentient species, and tonight it would host humanity's response. Lisa and her team entered through the main doors just as the Valkyrie elite were taking their seats. The room was enormous and decorated with trophies from conquered worlds. Banners hung from the ceiling, displaying symbols of Valkyrie dominance, and in the center was a massive table set for a feast. The High Matriarch herself sat at the head of the table. She was ancient beyond human comprehension, and her body was covered with ceremonial markings that told the story of her 4,000-year reign. Her eyes fixed on the humans as they entered, and there was no fear in them, only cold calculation. Lisa walked directly toward the High Matriarch, while explosions continued to light up the sky outside. Sub-Matriarch Vexus tried to intercept her, but Nathan stepped in the way with his weapon drawn. The ceremonial guards moved to respond, but Patricia released her compound into the air. The effect was immediate and devastating. Valkyrie throughout the hall began to stumble and click in confusion as their pheromone communication collapsed. They could no longer coordinate, and they could no longer sense each other the way they had for their entire lives. It was like being struck blind and deaf at the same time. Had infiltrated the hall earlier, disguised as servants, and they now revealed themselves. They were not diplomatic security. They were special forces soldiers who had trained for exactly this kind of operation. They moved through the confused Valkyrie with brutal efficiency and secured key positions throughout the hall. Lisa reached the High Matriarch and looked up at the ancient being who had ordered the deaths of billions. The matriarch was not affected by Patricia's compound because her biology was different from the younger Valkyrie. She stared down at the human with something that might have been respect. "You are more capable than we anticipated," she said in a voice like grinding stone. Lisa replied that humanity had a lot of practice with being underestimated. The matriarch asked what the humans hoped to achieve. They could not destroy the Dominion with a single ship, and eventually reinforcements would arrive. The humans might win this battle, but they would lose. The war. Samuel stepped forward and addressed the High Matriarch directly. He spoke in formal Valkyrie, which he had learned during the journey, and his words made the ancient ruler freeze. He invoked the challenge of succession by the ancient right written in the founding laws of the Dominion. He declared that humanity had survived the formal hunt and had turned the predators into prey. Under Valkyrie law, this gave humans the right to claim a position within the hierarchy, and that claim could not be denied. The matriarch was silent for a long moment, and then she asked how a human knew about this right. Samuel explained that he had found references to it in the historical records of the extinct species. The Valkyrie had erased most evidence of the challenge, but they had not erased everything. Fragments remained hidden in the cultures they had consumed, and Samuel had pieced them together. The right was real, and it was still binding, undermining the very traditions that gave her power. If she tried to dismiss the human claim, then other Valkyrie might begin to question what other traditions she was willing to break. Lisa understood what Samuel had done. He had not just found a legal loophole, he had found a weapon more powerful than any warship. The Valkyrie Empire was held together by tradition and hierarchy, and Samuel had just driven a wedge into the foundation of both. The matriarch looked around the hall at her confused and defeated subjects. She looked at the sky, where human weapons were systematically destroying everything her empire had built in this system. She looked at the small human woman standing before her without fear. "What do you want?" she asked. Lisa said she wanted the Valkyrie to recognize humanity as equals under their own law. She wanted the formal hunts to end, and the prey species designation to be removed. She wanted the Valkyrie to understand that the galaxy had changed. They were no longer the only predators. The matriarch said those terms were unacceptable, and that the Dominion would never bow to a species barely 1,000 years old. Lisa nodded and touched her neural implant again. Outside, the Endurance fired a precision strike that destroyed the matriarch's personal palace. The explosion was visible from the Great Hall, and debris rained down on the city for miles around. "That was your home," Lisa said. "The next strike will be this hall and everyone in it. We are not here to negotiate. We are here to inform you of the new terms." The matriarch looked at Lisa with new understanding. These humans were not like the other species she had consumed. They were not prey at all. They were something else entirely. Samuel continued to broadcast everything happening to every corner of Valkyrie space and beyond. The species that had been oppressed and terrorized for 60,000 years were watching their masters brought low by beings they had never even heard of. The foundation of Valkyrie power was crumbling in real time. The matriarch asked Lisa if she understood what she was doing. Destroying the Dominion would create chaos across the galaxy, and millions would die in the resulting power vacuum. Lisa replied that humanity knew all about chaos and destruction. They had lived with it for their entire history. The difference was that humans did not pretend to be civilized while eating other sentient beings. Whatever came after the Dominion would be better than this. She gave the matriarch one final chance to accept the terms. The ancient ruler looked at her empire falling apart around her, and made the only choice she could. She accepted. The great hall fell silent, as the high matriarch spoke the words of acceptance. Her voice carried across the chamber, and every Valkyrie who could still hear understood that their world had changed forever. The ancient empire that had ruled the Orion Arm for 60,000 years had just recognized a species barely a millennium old as equals under their own law. Lisa did not smile in triumph, because this was not a moment for celebration. Too many species had died in this hall, and too many more had been consumed by Valkyrie hunger across the centuries. This was a moment for justice, and for making sure it never happened again. She told the matriarch that accepting the terms was only the beginning. Humanity would be watching, and if the Valkyrie ever returned to their old ways, then humans would return as well. Next time there would be no negotiation, and no challenge of succession. Next time there would only be war, until one species or the other was extinct. Said she understood, and Lisa believed her. The ancient ruler had not survived 4,000 years by being stupid. She recognized when the balance of power had shifted, and she knew how to adapt. The humans had proven themselves worthy of respect, and the Valkyrie would give it to them. Nathan lowered his weapon but kept it ready as he surveyed the hall. His soldiers maintained their positions and continued to guard against any sudden attacks. The pheromone confusion was beginning to fade, and some of the Valkyrie were recovering their coordination. A single wrong move could still turn this into a massacre. Patricia monitored her biological sensors, and reported that the Valkyrie stress responses were beginning to normalize. The immediate danger was passing, but they would need to leave soon before someone decided to test whether the humans were really as dangerous as they seemed. Samuel continued his broadcast and made sure every detail was recorded for history. To the watching galaxy, what had happened here and what it meant. The Valkyrie had called humanity prey, and humanity had responded by becoming the predator. This was a lesson that every species would remember for generations. Lisa addressed the matriarch one final time and asked if there was anything else that needed to be discussed. The ancient ruler said there was one thing. She wanted to know why. The Valkyrie had consumed 17 species, and none of them had ever fought back like this. What made humans different? Lisa thought about the question for a long moment before answering. She said that humanity was not special. They were not smarter, or stronger, or more advanced than the species that had come before. The difference was that humans had never stopped fighting each other. They had practiced war for 10,000 years, and they had gotten very good at it. Other species had peace, she continued. They had harmony and cooperation, and they built beautiful civilizations. Then the Valkyrie came, and they did not know how to respond because they had never faced true predators before. But humanity was different. because humans were their own predators. They had always been both the hunter and the hunted. The matriarch nodded slowly and said she understood. Humans were not dangerous because they were powerful. They were dangerous because they were survivors. They had evolved to expect threats from everywhere, including each other, and that made them impossible to surprise. Lisa said that was exactly right. She told the matriarch to remember this lesson and to teach it to every Valkyrie who would come after her. The galaxy was not a place for predators and prey anymore. It was a place where every species had to learn to coexist or face the consequences. The High Matriarch rose from her seat and walked toward the great doors of the hall. Her guards and subjects parted before her, and she moved with the dignity of someone who had ruled for millennia. At the door she paused and looked back at the humans one final time. She said that in 4,000 years she had never met a species like humanity, and she hoped she never would again. Then she left, and the tension in the hall began to slowly release. Lisa gathered her team, and they made their way back to the shuttle. The Valkyrie they passed looked at them with a mixture of fear and respect that had never been directed at prey before. Nathan kept his weapon visible until they were safely inside, and the doors were sealed. The shuttle lifted off and climbed through an atmosphere still thick with smoke from the orbital bombardment. Captain Daniel Grant brought the Endurance alongside, and they docked without incident. The escort ships that had threatened them before now kept a respectful distance. Daniel met Lisa in the hangar bay and asked if everything had gone according to plan. Lisa laughed and said nothing had gone according to plan, but they had adapted. What humans did. The journey home took 2 weeks, and they spent most of it sending reports back to Earth Command. The leadership needed to know everything that had happened, so they could prepare for what came next. The Valkyrie would honor their agreement, because they had no choice. But other species might see opportunity in the chaos. Patricia studied the biological data she had collected, and began writing papers about Valkyrie physiology. Her research would help humanity understand their new equals, and maybe prevent future conflicts. Nathan debriefed his soldiers, and started planning for scenarios that might require similar operations in other parts of the galaxy. Samuel compiled his cultural analysis into a comprehensive guide for future diplomats. Understanding how other species thought and what traditions governed their behavior had saved them all. The challenge of succession had been the key to everything, and it had been hidden in plain sight for thousands of years. Lisa spent most of the journey staring out at the stars and thinking about the future. The Valkyrie Dominion would not fall immediately, but it was already beginning to fracture. Dozens of subjugated species who had seen the broadcast were now planning their own rebellions. Within a decade, the empire would split into 100 smaller states, and within a century, it would be nothing but a memory. Humanity would have to deal with the consequences of what they had done. The power vacuum left by the Valkyrie would create conflicts and wars and suffering across the galaxy. But Lisa believed it was worth it, because the alternative was worse. A galaxy ruled by predators who consumed the innocent was not a galaxy worth preserving. When the Endurance finally arrived at Earth, the entire planet was celebrating. News of what had happened at Sethax Prime had spread across human space, and people were calling it the greatest victory in their history, as heroes and honored with medals and speeches and parades. But Lisa knew the truth. They had not won a war. They had simply announced their presence to the galaxy in a way that could not be ignored. From now on, every species would know that humanity was not prey. They were something much more dangerous. Years passed, and the Valkyrie Dominion continued to weaken. The species they had oppressed rose up one by one and claimed their freedom. Some of them thanked humanity for showing them it was possible, and others wanted nothing to do with the violent newcomers. Either way, the galaxy was changing, and humanity was at the center of it. Lisa retired from diplomatic service and spent her remaining years writing about what she had experienced. She wanted future generations to understand why humanity had done what they did, and what it meant. The title of her book was simple and direct. She called it, Never Invite a Human to Dinner. The book became required reading at every diplomatic academy in human space, and eventually spread to other species as well. Its final chapter contained a warning that Lisa had spent years crafting. She wrote that humanity had proven they could be predators when necessary, but that was not what they wanted to be. They wanted to be partners and friends and allies. They wanted to explore the galaxy and meet new species and learn new things. But they would never forget the lesson of Sethax Prime. If anyone ever tried to make them prey again, they would respond the same way. They would adapt and overcome, and then they would sit down at the table and eat what was meant for them. That was humanity's promise to the galaxy. Treat them with respect, and they would be the best friends anyone could ask for. Treat them as prey, and they would remind everyone why predators should be afraid of humans. In the great halls of 100 civilizations, a new saying took root and spread from species to species until it was known across the entire galaxy. Never invite a human to dinner, because they always eat more than their share. And so humanity took its place among the stars, not as the strongest or oldest or wisest species, but as something perhaps more important. They became the species that reminded everyone else that survival was not guaranteed and power was not permanent. The Valkyrie had invited them as the main course, and humanity had responded by becoming the chef. They had taken their seat at the galactic table, and they had no intention of ever getting up. This was their story, and this was their promise. And this was why the galaxy would never forget the day that humanity was invited to dine. They came as prey, and they left as something else entirely. They left as humans.